They weren't supposed to be here. No one was supposed to be here. General Armitage could feel his pulse pounding in his ears as he stared out of the command ship's observation window, the sprawling cityscape of what should have been Earth's new home flickering below. He'd been to a dozen planets in his career, but none of them had ever felt like this. For starters, they'd made a promise, an oath to never step foot on a world that had already been marked as alien property. But as the massive alien blockade ships settled around them in orbit, their sleek, incomprehensible designs glinting ominously in the star-streaked void, Armitage realized that this oath, like so many others, was about to be tested. "They're not responding to our transmissions," his comms officer, Lieutenant Heather Talbot, said with an edge of disbelief in her voice. She tapped at her console again, but the screen only flickered more ominously. "I don't think they even know we're here yet." "Of course they know we're here," Armitage muttered under his breath, pacing the small bridge. "They've known we were coming for months." "Then why are we still in one piece?" Talbot asked. Her voice was thin, betraying a bit of panic. "Because they're being polite," Armitage said dryly. He had a sarcastic streak that kept him from cracking under pressure, but that didn't mean he wasn't getting worried. Every officer on this ship had read the reports. The Nivellans were an advanced race, far beyond anything humanity had encountered. And the humans had gotten a little too close to their forbidden zone, a region they'd marked as off-limits for any other species. If there was one thing that always worried Armitage, it was when aliens started playing by their own rules. As he turned to look at the rest of the bridge crew, a strange feeling of absurdity settled over him. Here they were, Earth's most experienced spacefaring crew, stuck in the middle of a foreign galactic zone with no idea what to do next. No directives, no plans, just a sense that they were about to make a colossal mistake. Then came the first transmission. The message wasn't in a language anyone on the ship could recognize. It was a jumbled mess of clicks, whistles, and odd harmonic sounds. But one thing was clear, this wasn't an ordinary first contact situation. The Nivellans weren't introducing themselves. They weren't inviting humanity to join their interstellar federation, either. Armitage's eyes narrowed as he listened to the strange frequency. "What in the hell is that?" "Not sure, sir," Talbot replied, hands still working furiously at her console. "I'm getting something, but it's not coming through cleanly. It's almost like they're trying to jam us, but it doesn't make any sense. Why bother with a warning if they're not going to attack?" "It's not a warning," Armitage replied slowly, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. "It's a challenge." "What do you mean, sir?" Talbot asked. "The Nivellans don't just invade," Armitage explained. "They've got an entire history of dishing out cruel restrictions on anyone who comes too close to their space. They don't fight wars like we do. They throw gauntlets, tests. And if you fail, well... Talbot pressed, leaning forward. "They find a way to make you regret it," Armitage finished. "We've got to find out what they want, and we've got to do it quickly, or..." The ship shook violently, and alarms started to blare. Armitage's hands shot out to grab onto the arm of his command chair. The lights dimmed for a moment, and the crew struggled to maintain their bearings. "Incoming," the tactical officer, Lieutenant Collins, shouted. A second later, the bridge was plunged into chaos as a bright blue pulse shot from one of the alien ships. It struck the command ship with the force of a wrecking ball, sending Armitage's heart racing. He could feel the metal groaning under the impact. "Report!" Armitage shouted, forcing himself to focus through the ringing in his ears. "Shields holding at 32%, sir." Collins barked. "Hull damage, minimal for now, but we've lost auxiliary power to sections 6 through 12. That's not going to hold for long." Armitage muttered. "They're probing us. Testing our defenses." He turned to Talbot. "Get me a channel to the Nivellan ships. I don't care if it's a long shot, tell them we're here to talk, not to fight." "Yes, sir." Talbot nodded, her fingers moving rapidly over the console. She was quick, efficient, but even she looked a little rattled now. As Armitage stood in the middle of the command deck, the magnitude of the situation finally hit him. The Nivellans weren't going to take this lightly. They didn't care about humanity's diplomacy, or the fact that they had been invited to this system by their most trusted galactic allies. They cared about one thing, and one thing only. They were about to test humanity's will to survive. And Armitage was stuck in the middle of it. The ship groaned again as the Nivellan pulse strike hit once more. The hum of the bridge's emergency lights created an eerie ambience as everyone scrambled to stabilize the ship. The crew was getting frantic, but General Armitage forced himself to maintain control, despite the unease gnawing at his gut. "Shields are down to 15%, Lieutenant Collins called out. His voice was steady but strained, showing signs of the mounting pressure. "Hull breach in 3 more locations, we've got debris scattered on the outer decks. We need to pull back, General." Armitage gritted his teeth. "No, we don't. We can't afford to run now. We need answers." He looked at Talbot, his eyes firm. "Can you raise a channel to the Nivellans, or not?" Talbot's fingers flew over her console. The language barrier was only one of the obstacles they faced. Nivellan tech was unlike anything they had ever seen, and their methods of communication were just as bizarre. But Talbot was relentless. She'd been trained for this. She paused and looked up at him, the weariness in her eyes barely hidden behind her usual resolve. "I've got something, but it's not like anything we've encountered before. It's part human, part something else. It's not even a language, it's a frequency. Can you understand it?" "No. Not yet," Talbot replied. "But it's not a your lost kind of signal. This is a we'll decide your fate kind of communication." A low hum filled the room, a warning that the aliens weren't playing around. The Nivellan ships seemed to be circling, though none had yet taken any more aggressive actions. It was as if they were giving humanity the chance to make the next move. "Then let's make it," Armitage decided, finally making up his mind. "It's time to start thinking outside the box, people. We need to stop trying to meet their expectations and make them meet ours." There was a pause. The bridge crew exchanged confused looks, unsure of what their commanding officer had in mind. Armitage didn't wait for them to catch up. He turned sharply to the communications officer. "What do we know about their culture?" "Anything? I need a lever here." Talbot's fingers hesitated on her console. I'm pulling up the files from the last envoy to Nivella. It's unconventional. They operate on rules and paradoxes. What's accepted is often unexpected." She gave him a frustrated glance. "The Nivellans don't think like us. They don't even seem to want anything from us, except for us to try and break their rules. They test us." "Perfect," Armitage muttered. "Then it's a test we'll ace." He stepped toward the main viewport, watching as the alien ships loomed overhead. There had to be something they weren't seeing, a weakness in their approach that could be exploited. "All right, listen up," Armitage barked. "We're going to create a scenario so absurd, so unlike anything they've ever encountered, that they'll have no choice but to respond. No more conventional tactics. We need to shock them into responding." "Shock them into responding?" Collins asked skeptically. "How do you propose we do that? Start offering them coffee?" "We're not offering them anything," Armitage replied, a spark of inspiration flickering in his mind. "We're going to put on a show. A ridiculous, impossible show. If there's one thing the Nivellans hate, it's unpredictability. They thrive on order. If we give them chaos, we might just break through." Talbot gave him a confused look. "And how do you plan to create chaos? Just press random buttons?" Armitage didn't flinch. "No. We're going to turn their game on its head. Let me show you." It only took a few minutes for Armitage to pull the crew together. The ship was still being rocked with intermittent pulses, but now, the general had an absurd plan that gave them a slim chance to outwit the alien fleet. "Bring up the standard planetary debriefing protocols," Armitage ordered. "And use the broadcasting system. We're going to make a public announcement." Are you sure that's wise, General?" Talbot asked, her brows furrowing. You got a better idea? We've been attacked already. The ship is on the brink of falling apart. So yeah, this is happening, Armitage said, pointing to the comms officer. Start transmitting. Now. The communication officer was already at work. Aye, sir. Starting transmission. Should I prepare the diplomatic language? No, no formalities, Armitage replied, crossing his arms and staring at the approaching Nivellan ships. No, we're doing this in the most human way possible. A total slap in the face. They'll expect us to be respectful, calculating. That's where we'll get them. The ship's system word as the message was sent out across frequencies, intercepted by every alien vessel in range. Armitage took a deep breath and then spoke directly into the comm. To the mighty Nivellans, he said, his voice taking on an exaggerated, theatrical tone. You've thrown your gauntlet, and we've got a response for you. He stepped back, pacing. You see, we humans, we don't play by the rules you set. No. We've got a saying here, hold my beer. Talbot and the rest of the crew watched in disbelief. Ah, sir, hold my beer? Are you serious? Talbot whispered, eyes wide with panic. Armitage shot her a quick grin. Trust me. Anyway, Armitage continued, his voice booming through the speakers, we've got this little tradition. When someone tells us we can't do something, we take it as a challenge. So here's the deal, if you want to test us, you better get ready for a ride. Because we're not stopping. Ever. He ended the transmission with a flourish, not waiting to see what came next. It was a gamble, but as the seconds ticked by, he couldn't help but feel a certain sense of satisfaction. And then, as if on cue, the ship shuddered again. This time, though, it wasn't from a pulse strike. A new, even more intense signal flooded their systems. A response. General. Talbot exclaimed, eyes glued to the screen. They've responded. It's not an attack, it's a signal, a challenge, and something else. She swallowed nervously, eyes widening. They're inviting us to compete. Armitage's grin widened. It was absurd, but for the first time, they might have a chance to turn the tide. The ship's alarms blared incessantly, the flashing lights casting a strobe-like effect across the bridge. Every officer in the room was on edge, but General Armitage stood frozen, eyes locked onto the main screen. The Nivellan response was even more confusing than expected, a cryptic transmission that didn't just challenge humanity, but invited them into a contest of some kind. What is this? Talbot murmured, staring at the untranslatable symbols that blinked on the screen. Is it a game? Some kind of test? That's exactly what it is, Armitage replied, his voice low and steady. This is their version of diplomacy, a competition. A test to see how far we'll push things before we break. He rubbed his eyes, trying to process the magnitude of the situation. The Nivellans weren't just trying to scare humanity off. No, they were toying with them, drawing them into a strange, high-stakes trial. A trial that Armitage didn't fully understand yet. Their rules aren't anything like ours, Talbot said, still scanning the data. I can't even make sense of this signal, let alone what kind of game they're suggesting. The frequency shifts, they don't match any known logic or pattern. Armitage turned to her with a grim smile. Good. We don't play by their rules anyway. He strode to the center of the bridge, his boots echoing on the metallic floor. The crew watched him, some with worry, others with a flicker of hope. It was clear to them now, the choice was simple. Accept the challenge, or stand down. We're going to play, Armitage said, the decision final. And we're going to win. The ship was still damaged, still struggling to stay in one piece. But Armitage had made up his mind. Whatever game the Nivellans wanted to play, humanity was going to play it in their own way, and win. We don't know what the rules are, sir, Lieutenant Collins said, looking up from his console, concern evident in his voice. How do we even prepare for something we don't understand? We use the one thing the Nivellans will never expect, Armitage replied, his eyes glinting with resolve. We use our unpredictability. We show them that humanity doesn't need rules to win. For the next few hours, the crew worked tirelessly to prepare for the unknown challenge. The ship was still holding on by a thread, but that didn't stop Armitage. He didn't need a perfect vessel, what he needed was an unshakable will. "Prepare a broadcast to the Nivellan ships," Armitage said, pacing again. "Tell them we're ready. And let them know, we don't play fair." Talbot raised an eyebrow, clearly unsettled by his order. "Sir, are you sure? We don't even know what this game is yet." "They could." "I know," Armitage interrupted. "But the one thing we can control is how we react to this situation. So we're going to react in the most absurd, unpredictable way possible. The Nivellans think they can test us by challenging our ability to follow the rules. We're going to show them that humanity doesn't follow rules. We make them up as we go." The bridge crew exchanged nervous glances but obeyed without hesitation. After a few minutes, a message was sent, one that defied all expectations. "We accept your challenge, Nivellans," the broadcast echoed across the alien frequencies. "And just to make things interesting, we're going to do it your way, but with our own twist." The crew waited, tense and uneasy, as the Nivellan ships held their position in orbit. Time seemed to stretch on forever. The ship's systems flickered sporadically, and the creaking of the hull reverberated through the deck. Everyone had their doubts, but none voiced them. This was the choice they had made. And then it came. A wave of energy washed over the ship, flooding their systems with a strange, almost hypnotic pulse. The entire crew froze for a moment as the ship's screens suddenly displayed a single, simple line of text. "Begin the trial." The Nivellan fleet, for the first time since their arrival, moved in sync, almost as if they were responding to a central command. But the silence that followed was more oppressive than ever. "What happens now?" Talbot asked, looking up from her console. Armitage took a deep breath and gestured for her to bring up the data stream. "Whatever it is, we're in. They wouldn't have sent that if they didn't think we were worth the challenge." The ship was quiet, save for the hum of the systems trying to adapt to the Nivellan interference. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. And then the Nivellans struck. A pulse of intense light and energy bombarded their ship, vibrating through the metal, rattling their bones. But it wasn't just physical. The wave of energy caused something much stranger. It was as though the world itself around them had become malleable, fluid, changing. The bridge shook violently. The gravity flickered, warping like some kind of unstable force field. 1 second, the officers felt weightless, the next, they were slammed back down into their chairs as the ship's gravitational systems tried to compensate. Armitage barely kept his balance, gripping the chair in front of him. "What the hell was that?" Collins shouted, gripping the console. "It's part of the challenge," Armitage said through gritted teeth. "They're testing our ability to adapt." In the blink of an eye, the screen before them changed again. A vast, empty expanse of space, dotted with strange, shimmering obstacles. A game board? No, it couldn't be that simple. Then, the voice came, calm and clipped, over the comm system. It was the Nivellan transmission again, only now, it was clear, the harmonic clicks and whistles forming recognizable words. "Survive the test of space." "What the hell does that mean?" Talbot whispered, her eyes wide with confusion. "They're giving us a riddle," Armitage said, suddenly grinning. "A cosmic obstacle course. It's like a game show, a test of our survival, resourcefulness, and maybe, our creativity." He gave a look to his crew, who seemed to be waiting for his next orders. The tension in the air was palpable. If they failed, it would be disastrous. But if they succeeded, they could turn the tables on the Nivellans. "They think we can't win," Armitage said, his voice low, fierce. "They think we'll fail because we don't play by their rules. But we're going to show them what humanity is really capable of. Hold tight, everyone. We're about to make our move." As Armitage and his crew prepared for whatever was coming next, the gravity flickered once again, and an eerie silence fell over the ship. The Nivellan challenge had begun. The ship's interior buzzed with urgency as Armitage and the crew scrambled to process the Nivellan test. Whatever the aliens had planned, it was more than just a challenge, it was a spectacle. A game designed to break humanity's will, to humiliate them. But for every move the Nivellans made, Armitage saw opportunity. The screen before them displayed a vast, empty space, scattered with strange objects, shimmering anomalies, floating debris, and obstacles that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. It was as if the Nivellans were testing them with an impossible scenario. How do we even begin? Collins asked, eyes wide with disbelief. These obstacles, they're not physical. It's like the whole environment is shifting. Armitage didn't flinch. The Nivellans are trying to throw us off balance. They think we'll panic. But they don't understand something important about humanity: we thrive in the chaos. He turned to his crew, rallying them with a fervor that caught even the most skeptical officer by surprise. This is what we're good at. The unknown, the unpredictable, the impossible. We've survived worse than this, and we're going to survive this too. Talbot looked up from her console, her face pale but determined. I've been analyzing the anomalies, General. They're all based on shifting frequencies. If we can, I don't know, sync our own systems to the fluctuations, maybe we can make the obstacles work for us instead of against us. Then let's do it, Armitage said firmly. We've got nothing to lose, and if we fail, well, we go down with a fight. But I believe in this crew. You all know what to do. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. The crew worked together in a synchronized chaos, each officer doing their part. Talbot and Collins were key in recalibrating the ship's sensors to read the frequency fluctuations of the Nivellan obstacles. The ship's navigation systems had to be entirely recalibrated to account for the impossible physics at play. Ready, sir, Talbot called out after several tense moments. We're synced with the frequency, let's move. All right. Initiating evasive maneuvers, Armitage ordered. The ship lurched forward as they navigated the first of the obstacles. The shimmering anomaly they had identified now hummed in harmony with the ship's systems, the frequency resonating in a way that caused the alien barrier to part like a curtain. Keep going! Armitage barked, heart racing. They had done it, at least, that was one obstacle behind them. But there was more ahead, far more. As they pushed further into the maze of shifting space, the obstacles grew more challenging. Large floating shards of some unknown material now blocked their path. But Armitage didn't hesitate. He had a plan. With every hurdle they faced, he found a creative, unpredictable solution. We're going to use them against themselves, he said, grinning. We've got to force them to break their own game. How? Talbot asked, skeptical but trusting. Armitage's plan was simple: they would exploit the Nivellan puzzle, using the obstacles to their advantage. By adjusting their ship's energy signature to match specific patterns in the alien anomalies, they could manipulate the environment. Every time the ship collided with an obstacle, instead of being destroyed, it sent shockwaves that caused the nearby anomalies to shift, opening new pathways. It was like reverse engineering the challenge. We're going to make them play our game, Armitage muttered, determination in his eyes. It wasn't long before they reached the heart of the Nivellan challenge. The final obstacle was unlike any they'd encountered. A swirling vortex of energy, far more intense than anything they had seen so far, stood between them and victory. It was a massive gravitational anomaly that threatened to pull the ship apart. General! Talbot shouted over the roar of the energy. If we hit that thing, we'll be torn to pieces. There's no way. Watch and learn, Armitage cut her off, his voice steady. He wasn't about to let them falter now. He turned to the navigation officer. I want you to reverse the polarity of the quantum engines. Set the ship to resonate at double the harmonic frequency. Talbot's eyes widened. That's insane. If it's wrong, we'll be ripped apart by the gravitational forces. Exactly, Armitage said with a gleam in his eye. We'll make them think we're going to fail. And then, with a flick of his hand, Armitage signaled the launch. The ship surged forward, faster than ever before. As they entered the vortex's influence, the entire crew braced for impact. The gravitational force was crushing, but Armitage had done the math. At precisely the right moment, the ship's resonance reached a critical frequency, allowing the gravitational forces to be reversed. The vortex erupted into a brilliant burst of light, but instead of destroying them, it propelled them through, scattering the surrounding anomalies like dust in a windstorm. The ship shot forward, clearing the final hurdle, its hull groaning under the stress. Silence followed, broken only by the hum of the ship's systems struggling to stabilize. "We did it," Talbot whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. But the moment of relief was short-lived. Suddenly, a sharp, commanding voice echoed through the ship's speakers. "You have passed the test." The crew was stunned. The Nivellans weren't attacking. They weren't punishing them. They were acknowledging their success. "General Armitage," the voice continued, "you have demonstrated the human spirit. A trait we did not anticipate." Armitage stood at the command console, unable to hide his smirk. "You didn't think we could win, did you? You've underestimated us, just like everyone else." The Nivellan voice was oddly calm now. "We have learned much from this encounter. You are worthy. Humanity may return to this sector, provided you abide by the ancient laws." Armitage gave a nod. "We'll respect your laws. But don't forget, you threw the gauntlet. And we accepted it. No one challenges humanity and walks away unscathed." The transmission ended. The Nivellan ships slowly began to pull back, their once imposing presence now fading into the distance. With the crisis averted and the Nivellan challenge passed, the crew of the Horatius stood in stunned silence. What had started as a dire conflict had turned into a monumental victory. Armitage turned to Talbot, his expression softening for the first time in hours. "I told you. We don't need to play by anyone else's rules. We make our own." Talbot grinned, finally letting out the breath she had been holding. "Well, I guess they learned that the hard way." Armitage chuckled, walking toward the bridge exit. "Let's get back to Earth. I've got a feeling they'll be watching us a lot more closely from now on. And if they think we'll stop, well, they really don't know us at all." As the Horatius turned toward home, Armitage couldn't help but think about how the galaxy had just learned a valuable lesson about humanity. One that the Nivellans, for all their power and wisdom, hadn't anticipated. Sometimes, the greatest weapon wasn't strength or technology, it was sheer, unrelenting unpredictability. And humanity, it seemed, had mastered that art better than any species before them.